And so it came to pass that the filibuster was dismembered, dishonored, and indefinitely detained. With the end of the filibuster came the end of any semblance of comity and compromise on Capitol Hill. The party that never cared much for the rule of law broke the rules of the Senate to change the rules. The rules, it seems, aren't binding upon the Senate Democrats. To them, the rules are living, breathing, evolving, and apparently optional. Is anyone really surprised that a party with no apparent concern for the burden of debt that they are placing on every American family, that such a party would break the rules to get their way? The iron-fisted rule of the rule breakers has now begun. There will be no return. Are they going to return to the rules halfway, partway? No, I predict they will only go further. If the tantrum used to not work, but now we will live in an era where the iron-fisted rule breakers will throw their tantrum and they will get whatever they want. Contrary to popular belief, the filibuster led to dialogue. I think the American public disavows this place and is unhappy with Congress in general because of lack of dialogue. But if there is to be no rules, what incentive is there for cooperation? If it's to be my way or the highway, if the majority party is simply to roll over, if they are to beat their fists, beat their iron fists upon the table and say, my way or the highway, we don't need you. We don't care that half the country disagrees with our policy. It's our way or the highway. If that's the way it's going to be, I think there'll be less dialogue and less compromise. Historically, the filibuster encouraged a reluctant president to cooperate with oversight from the Congress. This isn't a Republican or Democrat thing. This is about the separation of powers. This is about the checks and balances to power. This is about using the filibuster to get information from a reluctant president. This is about a filibuster that allowed Congress to get information to say and to force a president to say, I will not kill Americans with drones. This is about a reluctant president being asked, will you detain Americans? Can you put an American in jail without a trial? Can you send an American to Guantanamo Bay? How do we get those answers from a president who is reluctant to answer? Through the filibuster. The filibuster is an empowerment of Congress. It really isn't Republican versus Democrat. The filibuster is about Congress having power over the presidency or having power to counterbalance a presidency. Recently, I had questions for the nominee for Homeland Security. I asked him, does the Fourth Amendment apply to third-party records? This is a big question. It's a big constitutional question. And there are answers. I might not have agreed with his answer. He said he had no opinion. He had no legal opinion on the Fourth Amendment. I asked him, can one warrant from a secret court apply to all telephone records? Can every American who has their records with a phone company have their records looked at through one warrant? Is that consistent with the Fourth Amendment? And this nominee said, yeah, I really don't have an opinion on the Fourth Amendment. Really haven't thought that much about the Constitution, but he's going to lead one of the largest agencies in our government that may well have to do with spying on Americans, and yet has no opinion on the Fourth Amendment. But for the most part, holds were placed on nominees that wouldn't answer questions. So if you wanted answers from nominees, you didn't want them to get up there and say, I don't recall 49 times, or I can't remember, or I don't have an opinion today, sir, on the Constitution, you would hold their nomination. You would hold their feet to the fire. Currently, we have a president who apparently thinks he's more than a president. He thinks he has a few monarchical powers. He believes more that he's a monarch than he is a president because he thinks he can amend legislation. 20 times, more than 20 times, Obamacare has been amended after the fact. They don't come back to Congress. So what would the filibuster do? What would a hold do? It would say to that president, you will obey the Constitution. We have no way really to get him in court on these things. It's very difficult to prove the constitutionality or disprove it by a challenge. But the beauty of our founding fathers was that they separated the power. So one of the powers of Congress is the filibuster. It is placing holds. And by doing that, we check a rebellious or an adventurous president, or a president who thinks he can take this power upon himself. Montesquieu, who was one of the people we looked to about the separation of powers, once wrote that when you allow the legislative power to gravitate to the president, when you allow the president to take this power and he can legislate or do whatever he wants, you're allowing a tyranny. That's why Montesquieu wrote that you had to separate these powers so no one body of people, no one grouping within government would assume or absorb too much power. That's what's happening here. Let's be really frank with each other. The Senate Democrats have, for petty partisan reasons, taken away the power of Congress, taken away one of the checks and balances on a rogue presidency. The loss of the filibuster, I think, truly weakens Congress, and it makes the executive, regardless of party, more powerful and less likely to be transparent, and really less likely to compromise. In short, when you give power to the party in the minority, when you have that power in the party that is in the minority, it works to coax compromise out of people. In the era of filibusters and holds, someone like myself, who's new to the Senate, could place a hold on the Federal Reserve Chairman and release it in exchange for a vote on auditing the Fed. Auditing the Fed passed 3 years ago in the House. It's a transparency bill. We should know what decisions happen. Congress created the Fed. People are getting personally wealthy off of the policies of the Fed. There's a revolving door between the Fed and the Treasury and the people who sell the Treasury bonds. There are Treasury secretaries who leave employment in government and make $160 million a year buying and selling the securities that are bought from a bank that we are not overseeing properly. There's all kinds of reasons why we should audit the Fed. Every Republican in the House voted for it. 100 Democrats voted for it. You rarely have a bill that 350 out of 435 representatives voted to audit the Fed. It's been over here for 3 years. It's been held hostage by the Senate majority. The only way the minority party ever gets any votes on anything is by using their leverage, by using the leverage of the filibuster, by using the leverage of a hold, I think often to get something good. There are a lot of things that need to be discussed that are never discussed in this body. The Senate will now be run with an iron fist, a fist clenched so tightly, a power wound so closely that dissent will no longer be heard. Debate will be stifled, and amendments to legislation will become non-existent. They're already rare. Washington described the Senate as the saucer that cools the tea that boils over from the cup of the House of Representatives. The Senate was that saucer that cooled the tea, deliberated, gave review, and time for calmer minds to prevail. The Senate was one of those items that our founders established to separate our republic from the whims of an unrestrained majority, from the headlong dash of an unrestrained mobocracy. I think the public will be burned more often as the Senate becomes less saucer and more boiling cauldron. This is something that we as Americans should be extremely worried about. This is the stuff of kings. This is the stuff of monarchs, and this is the stuff of tyrants. Because he thinks that he can do the legislation by himself. But if there is no recourse to come back to Congress, what happens? Obamacare is a story of favoritism. It's a story of dispensing favorites to your contributors, your friends. Should we have a government where your campaign contribution buys you a different sort of scrutiny? It's no longer equal protection under the law. It's protection based on contribution history. So we've given waiver after waiver to special interest groups. You can see them with a big smile plastered on their face when they come out of the White House. There are special interest groups that have been to the White House hundreds of times. Meanwhile, the secretary in charge of putting up Obamacare and getting it started was there once, but hundreds of times special interests came. They paid first. They gave their campaign contributions. They paid. They got access to the White House, and they got a waiver. Why would McDonald's get a waiver and not Burger King? Why would one business get a waiver and not another? Why would a union business get a waiver and not another business that's not union? Is that equal protection under the law? Is that the way we're going to live? That's the way you will live if you allow all the power to gravitate to one person who has no checks and balances. Thomas Paine said that government is a necessary evil. He was right. That sounds kind of harsh, but the thing is we need to have government, but because government's inefficient, we should keep what government does to a minimum. There's certain things we probably can't have private industry do. A national defense, an army, a navy, an air force. Government needs to be in place for that. We've decided with most of our infrastructure to have government involved. We have some private entities involved as well. But do we really want government involved in every one of our affairs? Do we really think government is going to be distributing goods very well? A big part of Obamacare is the expansion of Medicaid. I want to help people who can't help themselves. There are a lot of people who are missing both legs and on dialysis, and they're $10,000 a month insurance. I think we can find a way to help these people. But we've now added able-bodied people to this. We've now added generation after generation of able-bodied people to the Medicaid rolls. But it's also the most rapidly rising cost in state governments. So state governments, I believe, will ultimately succumb to this burden. In our state, it'll be a 50% increase in Medicaid. In fact, most of the people signing up around the country, 3/4 of them in my state are signing up for free health care. It's not really free. You're going to pay for it. Anybody that's working will pay for it. But the thing is, that's what they're signing up for is free. We've been having this debate for a while. The president has decided that, people who are working just have too much money, and I've got to take from those who are working to give to those who aren't working. That's not how you get more jobs. The president preaches fear and envy. He preaches class warfare. He preaches that if your neighbor has 3 cars, send me, I'll take one of their cars. I'll get some of your neighbor's stuff and I'll give it to you. The problem is it doesn't make us richer as a nation. Instead of being jealous and envious of others, I should be saying that we're all interconnected and that we want more people to rise up and be one of the top 1%. Instead of taking a meat axe to those who are successful in our society and trying to drive them down, we should try to raise everybody's boat. There have been many histories when many times when this has happened. In the 1920s, Coolidge took the top rate from 70% down to 23%. We had a boom. Employment thrived. He balanced the budget. We did it again under Kennedy in the 60s. Unemployment was once again cut in half. By the time we get to Reagan, the rates have risen to 70% again. And Reagan said, our economy will boom if we lower rates on everybody. And he did. He lowered rates from 70% at the top rate, the top 1%. He lowered their rates. He didn't raise their rates. He didn't say, covet thy neighbor. He didn't say, I'll get you one of your neighbor's cars. He said, lower the rates and the economy will boom, and it did. We lowered the rates from 70 on the wealthy to 50 to 28, and we had a decade-long boom with millions of jobs created. We have to have this debate as a country. We can't say the debate's over. If we say the debate is over and that really what we need to do is just divide it up, pass the money around, we're going to be talking about a shrinking pie that we pass around. We also have a pie right now that has millions of people unemployed. So how are we going to grow as an economy? Are we going to grow as an economy by saying let's tax people more? It's exactly the opposite. I was in Detroit last week talking about how we could help Detroit. We can't send money from Houston to Detroit and bail them out. Doesn't work. One, because it's just like when the president did his government stimulus. When the president chose to pick winners and losers, he wound up with a bunch of losers because no central planner knows who's going to be the winner and who's going to be the loser. 9 out of 10 businesses fail. That's why you don't want government choosing the winners and losers. So when government chooses the winners and losers, they choose people like Solyndra. One, it was a little bit unfair on the face of it. The guy who ran the company was the 20th richest man in the country. What business do the middle class, which the president says he's so proud of, what business does the middle class having given money to the 20th richest man in the world? Because the marketplace, when it winnows out and finds who will be successful running a business, is a harsh taskmaster, but it asks all of you. It asks 300 million Americans every day to vote on which businesses will succeed. And so you get to vote every day. So there's a big difference between reducing taxes for those who are in business and trying to stimulate the economy, and taxing people in Houston, bringing it up here, and then passing it out to people I think might be good at business in Detroit. No one knows that. No one has that knowledge. Only the marketplace can decide who's a good risk and who's a bad risk. Banks are part of that, but really the consumer votes every day on which businesses are good and should receive more money. So my plan is basically economic freedom zones. Let's lower the taxes in impoverished areas. Let's don't tax Houston and bring a bunch of money up to Detroit and say, here, you're going to succeed. The same thing will happen to that money that happened to the last 50 years of money. Some of it's stolen, some of it's misappropriated, some of it's given to the wrong people. But if you were to lower the taxes for the people in Detroit, I think you could truly help them. My bottom line is, remember, separation of powers is important, and the loss of the filibuster, I think, is leading towards a one-sided party rule and leading towards less power here and more power in the executive branch, I think all to the detriment of the voter.